Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and this is my card and video for the Stampendous and AmyR's blog hop that is going on this week. My post goes up today, Monday, and then there'll be posts throughout the week, so check out my blog for all the info on that. I will have a link directly to the blog post in the description box below the video. So I'm starting off with this Stampendous Sketchy Blooms rubber stamp. And I had this piece of watercolor paper, just random watercolor paper in my stash that just so happened to be big enough that I could stamp the image twice. I do get asked that a lot if I make more than one card at a time, if I mass produce anything like that. And most of the time, no. I generally only make one card at a time. I don't pre-make cards before I film. I just kind of do what I do with the time I have. But this was one of the few times that it just worked to make two cards at once. Because generally making at least two, even three or four if you wanted to, it takes less time than it would be to make four separate cards, if that makes sense. So I had this piece of watercolor paper and I was like, you know what, I might as well do two images. Plus it's good practice, and when it comes to watercoloring, it's always fun to see, no matter what you do, it's always going to be different. So I stamped the image twice with Versamark ink, which is a clear, very sticky ink. It's always my preferred ink when embossing. So I coated the cardstock first, or the watercolor paper first, with my anti-static powder tool. And that just keeps the embossing powder from sticking to anything other than the stamped image. And then I stamped the image twice in the Versamark ink. And then I'm coating it with Stampendous Detail White embossing powder and just holding it over a coffee filter to catch all that excess powder that I can then funnel back into the container. And then I'm going to take my heat tool and heat all this embossing powder until it melts, which is always the funnest part. I think you should be able to kind of see here when the embossing powder actually starts to melt, and you just hold the tool there long enough just till it melts, as you don't want to overheat it, plus you don't ever want to burn the paper. So you just keep the tool moving until the powder melts, and then you give it just a few seconds to cool off. And then because this is a larger piece, I have this little masonite board in my stash. These are super cheap. I again will have links to this in the supplies, but because this is a larger piece, I couldn't use my Epicurean cutting board, which is what I always use when I watercolor, but my cutting board's really tiny. It doesn't fit anything bigger than like maybe 5x7. So I used the masonite board. Just basically any, strong, stiff surface would work to tape it down with some painter's tape, and this just prevents the cardstock from really warping with the water and everything that I'm doing. And then for my palette, I literally just have a piece of copy paper that I put a piece of acetate on top of, and I'll have links to the acetate. It's the same stuff that I use for shaker cards, all that kind of stuff. I have a huge container of it that I've had for years. What works really well too is taking a piece of white cardstock and laminating it. I'm planning on doing that. I just haven't got around to it yet. So this works in a pinch. So this just helps me to actually see the colors better. I usually would mush my inks onto like an acrylic block or my craft sheet, but with the craft sheet being brown, you can't really see the colors. And with an acrylic block, I would need a really large one because I was doing two images and using quite a bit of color. So again, I will have all the colors listed with the supplies that I used for these. And I've super sped up the watercolor process here because otherwise this video would have been super long. Also, I kept stopping and, dealing with the kids or whatever other little random interruptions and left my camera running way too many times. So this video would have been, goodness, an hour or too long. So I edited those parts out and then just sped up this actual watercolor process. But the gist of it was I applied clean water to each area that I wanted to watercolor, and then I just picked up different bits of the distress inks that I wanted to use, kind of let them mix. I wasn't super particular about it either. Like I let it go over the lines here and there, trying a little harder for me to go outside the lines, not be so particular, especially with watercolor, because it's kind of meant to, do its own thing. And then I let each area dry before I went on to the next, even though it is embossed, so it kind of contains it a little bit more. But after I let everything dry, I did the background, which, same thing. I applied clean water. I used a larger brush. These are all from the little Ranger brush kit, so I'll have that linked as well. And just dropped in the darkest bit I used tumbled glass and a little bit of broken china ink there. and then let it kind of fade out. And then once everything was dry, I am peeling off the painter's tape. And the best way to do that, if you don't want to tear your cardstock, is to peel it off at a fairly sharp angle. I wasn't too worried about this because I'm planning on die cutting anyway, but if you want to protect the edges, you just want to be careful with it. And yeah, pull it at a sharp angle. But I have these wonky stitched rectangle dies from My Favorite Things that I absolutely love. And the largest die is huge. It is basically the size that works perfectly for a card panel, like for a panel on the front of an A2 card. It's not quite that size. I think it's 4 by 5.25 inches. But yeah, and then it gives that perfect, fun, wonky stitched edge, which I just love. So I was so excited to use it on these cards. So I die cut those watercolor panels with that die. And then I have some Fuse Green cardstock from MFT as well, which I don't use very often, and yet I really like this shade of green. And the color just kind of worked really well with the Distress ink colors I'd used for the leaves. So I cut a sheet in half and then scored them at 5.5 inches. So they're top folding A2 size cards, 4.25 by 5.5. And before I add the actual panels to the card, I thought I would finish the insides first. So I just grabbed the same Stampendous stamp and inked it up with the coordinating Fuse Green dye ink and stamped that onto the inside of the card. So I could have used the Versamark for this if I'd wanted, but I just thought the dye ink would just look a little bit deeper. And I would either write with like a white gel pen or even just a regular ballpoint pen. You can write right over this and you'd be able to see the writing just fine. So I stamped that on the inside of the cards, and then I have a sentiment that is from the Stampendous Seaside Chair set. So I had this set, and it had this perfect sentiment that just said "Thankful for today." I thought that was kind of rather fitting, and I loved the font of it too. So I lined it up on my craft mat here, and then I'm going to ink it up with Hero Arts black ink. This is one of my absolute favorite inks for stamping sentiments and that sort of thing. Like, it's just, I wish I'd had this ink years ago. I remember I did a video, goodness, years ago about my favorite black inks and why. And this one isn't in it, and it should be. I think I need to refilm that video. But anyway, I inked up the stamp with that ink and then just stamped it on the lower right corner of the inside of the card. And then before I adhere the watercolor panel, I want to add some ribbon because this is for the Stampendous and AmyR's ribbon blog hop. And anyone who's been watching my videos or reading my blog for a long time knows I have a soft spot for AmyR's ribbon. I absolutely love it, and I own a lot of it. So I pulled out, this is the 7/8 inch pink solid checked ribbon. And gorgeous ribbon. I love this stuff. I don't use it on cards very often, and if I do what I'm doing now, which is just cut a piece and I'm going to wrap it around the card panel here. I find when using thicker ribbon like this, it creates quite a bit of bulk, which it depends on my mood. Sometimes I like that, like the big fabulous bow you'll get from it. But I usually like that on larger cards, like if I was doing a large square card or a 5x7 card, just because this ribbon is quite wide. But it's so pretty. So I just wrapped it around the watercolor panel there, and didn't bother me at all that it covered up some of the watercoloring, because yeah, I had that in mind the entire time when I was making this, that this is what I was going to do. And then I've got, this is some 5/8 inch natural crochet ribbon, and this is another favorite of mine, and I'm just about out now. So that's why I was using the entire piece to try and kind of salvage some of it before I had to trim off the ends. But this part I didn't edit out. Usually I edit out me fiddling and tying bows and that, but I know people like to watch this. I do have a video on tying bows from, again, years ago. It's the same technique still, but it's just a finicky process, but the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And the one thing I can definitely say here is when you're adjusting the bow itself is I pinch that knot right there. I end up, I use both hands and most of my fingers because I don't want to pull the bow apart or loosen it. So to keep it tight, I pinch the center as I kind of adjust and use my fingers to get the bow positioned perfectly in the shape I want. With this, it's a little different because it's a crochet ribbon, but still so pretty. I just love it. So I did that twice. And of course, this creates bulk, but not nearly as much. And yet I've got the two textures of the ribbon, the watercolor, and this was just a really fun card to make. So as a final little embellishment, I added some enamel dots to the card front, and then added a bunch of foam tape to the back of the pieces. And then I'm going to press these onto each of the card base, and that's all there was to it. So if you're interested in any of the supplies I used, the distress inks I used, the colors, all that kind of stuff, they are linked below the video in the description box, as well as there will be a link to my blog post, as well as links to the other posts in the hop, all that sort of info. So just check out the description box below the video if any of that interests you. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos. I really love the interaction and all the fun we have on here, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.